The late afternoon sun dipped low over the city, painting the skyline in hues of amber and gold. In a quiet corner of downtown, a small coffee shop buzzed with the hum of tired voices and the clink of porcelain cups. Behind the counter stood Elena Martinez, a barista in her early 30s, her dark hair swept into a messy bun. Her hands moved with practiced grace as she poured steaming espresso, her warm smile a constant amidst the chaos of the evening rush. To the customers who shuffled in, briefcase-laden commuters, students with heavy backpacks, she was a fleeting bright spot, a steady presence in their daily grind. But tonight, Elena's smile faltered, just for a moment. She caught sight of a familiar face in the line, James Carter, a wiry man in his 50s with salt and pepper hair and a faded denim jacket 2 sizes too big. He came in every evening, ordering the same thing, a small black coffee, no sugar, no cream. He'd linger at a corner table, nursing the cup until it grew cold, his eyes tracing the cracks in the wooden floor. Elena had noticed the way his hands trembled slightly as he counted out coins, the way his shoulders slumped under an invisible burden. Tonight, though, something was different. His jacket hung looser, his face more gaunt, and when he reached the counter, his voice barely rose above a whisper. "Just the usual, please," he said, sliding a crumpled dollar bill across the counter. His eyes didn't meet hers. Elena nodded, her instincts prickling. She'd seen that kind of exhaustion before, not just the physical kind, but the soul-deep weariness that clings like damp fog. As she handed him the chipped mug, she noticed a faint smudge of dirt on his sleeve and the way he clutched his tattered bag a little too tightly. "Long day?" she asked, keeping her tone light. James offered a thin smile, more reflex than feeling. "Yeah, something like that." He shuffled to his usual spot, settling into the chair with a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of years. The shop emptied out as the sky darkened, leaving only the soft hum of the espresso machine and the patter of rain against the windows. Elena wiped down the counter, her gaze drifting to James. He hadn't touched his coffee. Instead, he stared out at the street, where headlights cut through the drizzle. Something about the scene tugged at her, a quiet ache she couldn't ignore. She'd been where he was once, years ago, scraping by after her mother's illness drained their savings. She knew the look of someone holding on by a thread. When closing time crept near, Elena made a decision. She brewed a fresh pot, poured 2 cups, and carried them over to his table. "Mind if I join you?" she asked, sliding into the seat across from him before he could protest. James blinked, startled. Sure. I don't. I mean, you don't have to." "I want to," she said simply, pushing the second mug toward him. "This one's on me. Looks like you could use it." For a moment, he said nothing, his fingers tracing the rim of the cup. Then, in a voice rough with disuse, he murmured, "Thanks. Been a while since anyone noticed." Elena leaned forward, her elbows resting on the table. "You come in here every day, James." "I notice." "What's going on?" He hesitated, the words caught somewhere between pride and surrender. Finally, he exhaled, his shoulders sagging. "Lost my job a few months back. Construction work dried up, and I couldn't keep up with rent. Been staying in my truck since then. It's not so bad, keeps me dry, mostly, just trying to figure things out." The admission hung between them, heavy but not hopeless. Elena listened, her heart tightening. She saw no self-pity in his eyes, only a quiet resolve, the kind forged in the crucible of hard days. "You've been carrying that alone?" she asked softly. James shrugged. "Didn't want to bother anyone. People have their own problems." She nodded, recognizing the sentiment. but she also knew silence could be its own prison. "You're not a bother, James." "Not to me." The next morning, Elena arrived at the shop early, her mind buzzing with an idea. She couldn't erase James's hardships, but she could lighten the load. She called her landlord, a kind-hearted woman named Rosa who owned a few properties nearby. "I've got a favor to ask," Elena began, explaining James's situation. Rosa listened, her voice warm with understanding. By the end of the call, she'd agreed to rent out a small studio apartment at a steep discount, temporary, but a start. That evening, when James walked in, Elena greeted him with more than a coffee. "Got a minute?" she asked, leading him outside after the last customer left. The rain had stopped, leaving the air crisp and clean. She handed him a key, its metal glinting under the streetlight. "What's this?" he asked, brow furrowing. "Your new place," she said, grinning. "It's not much, a studio a few blocks from here. Rent's covered for 3 months, thanks to my landlord. Gives you some breathing room." James stared at the key, his breath catching. "Elena, I can't take this." "You can't," she said firmly, her voice steady but kind. "You've been fighting alone long enough. Let someone help you back up." His eyes glistened, and for a moment, he couldn't speak. When he did, his voice cracked. "I don't know how to thank you." "You don't have to," she replied. "Just keep being you. That's enough." Over the next few weeks, James settled into the apartment, a modest space with a creaky bed and a tiny kitchen. It wasn't luxury, but it was a roof, a lock, a chance to rest. Elena checked in when she could, bringing leftover pastries from the shop or just sitting with him over coffee. Word spread quietly among the regulars. Someone had seen Elena slip James the key, and soon, small acts of kindness followed. A customer offered him a part-time gig at a hardware store. Another dropped off a box of clothes, claiming they didn't fit anymore. One evening, as Elena wiped down tables, James walked in, his step lighter than she'd ever seen. He carried a small toolbox, his hands steady now. "Got a job," he said, a real smile breaking through. "Full-time, starting Monday. Fixing up old buildings. Feels good to be useful again." Elena beamed. "I knew you had it in you." "It's more than that," he said, setting the toolbox down. "You didn't just give me a place to sleep. You gave me a reason to keep going. I'm not sure I'd have made it this far without that." The words settled over her like a warm blanket. She hadn't set out to change his life, just to ease a burden she couldn't ignore. But as she watched James rebuild, she realized something: kindness wasn't a single act. It was a spark, igniting hope in places long darkened. Months later, a local paper picked up the story, a barista's quiet generosity turning a stranger's life around. The article went viral, shared across social media with captions like, "Humanity at its best." Elena shrugged off the attention, but James didn't. He started volunteering at a shelter, sharing his story with others teetering on the edge. "Someone saw me when I couldn't see myself," he'd tell them. "That's all it takes." Back at the coffee shop, Elena poured espresso and smiled at her customers, same as always. But now, she carried a quiet certainty. One small gesture could ripple outward, touching lives she'd never know. And in a world often shadowed by rush and noise, that was a legacy worth brewing.